So do you want to start out, maybe just describe, because you were here a few times, weren't you?
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know if you can remember all the...
I don't know, because it's starting to go.
Yeah.
I've been told over the last few months that it's getting bad. Anyways, that goes with age.
So the first time that you started in the bunker was before your APC time. That was when you were with
Yes,
the military.
in uniform, yes.
Okay.
When did I come in here? 1973.
Okay.
Spring of 73. And I was employed in the Facility Control Center, telecommunications.
And did you come in as, that wasn't your first tour, I assume?
That was my first tour. I came in here from the Airborne Regiment in Edmonton.
Okay.
So I was a sergeant at the time, promoted to warrant officer shortly after I arrived here, and then I took over supervising one of the 4 shifts that ran the overall telecommunications.
Okay. And did you know anything about the bunker before they posted you here?
Other than I lived in Ottawa, and I used to get newspapers from my parents on the facility being built, and the rumors and whatnot. Of course, they stopped once I got here.
So people were posting things in the media then about?
Well, there was stuff in the media about what was going on up here. I don't know if you know, but years and years and years ago, this hill here used to be a picnic grounds. And Loblaws, because my dad worked at Loblaws, used to have their annual picnics here years and years ago. Okay. You know, back in the 50s. And then, of course, after I got here, I found out that this particular area was not the prime area or the first area selected for the facility. When they did soil sample tests, the facility was going to be built near Almont. And then when they ran into some soil samples, and the soil samples here, they decided that it would be preferable to put it in here. That's based on the design of the building, sitting on top of a granular, I don't know what you call it, but anyways, they decided to move it here. Then the facility that they ended up doing out in Almont was our receive site. We had one in Almont and one in Dunbrowne, our R1 North and R1 South, they called them.
Okay. So when you arrived at the bunker, just having heard a few of these rumors, what type of rumors were they that you heard about? Well,
no, this was just stuff that was in the newspaper. Stuff that, you know, there's a secret facility was being built and this and that. You know, the typical stuff that the press would throw in the paper. Okay. Other than that, the only thing I knew about it was previous communicators that had been posted here and out, and we shared a lot of the knowledge of the equipment that was in here and how it was employed. But there's certain things that took place in here, stayed here, you know, as far as who and the communications were provided for and so on and so on. That, you know, was expanded on when I got here and started working within the walls of the premises here.
And what was your first impression when you when you arrived at the parking lot, walked in, went through security, that kind of thing?
Security was tight then. You know, everything was controlled at the gate. The gates were locked, all electric. And then the initial processing was done at the gate. Then you're escorted in, and the area that you signed the register in, it was on the opposite side of the hall then. And the military police, and you were processed, identify, you know, your ID and your card. Escorted to your place of employment, meeting your new boss, and then all the briefing started on the facility, what's to be kept inside, and a tour of the facility, you know, where the washrooms are, where you eat, where coffee breaks are, and then right into learning and getting some odd job training on your particular area of responsibility. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just thinking of something when you were talking there. Okay, that's good. Was there anything was there anywhere that you couldn't go as in your first position, the places that you weren't allowed to be in?
Well, because I was in the communication side, and at that time, this here provided, what was it called, STRAD? I forget what the acronym was, Strategic Telecommunication. All of National Defense's communications came through here. Anything that was going from here, for example, from Ottawa, National Defense Headquarters, going to Halifax, it came in through here, in through the switch, and then out. And then my particular area of responsibility with the crew I had was maintaining all of those lines of communications to provide that for the STRAD, and dealing with Bell Canada and all of the telephone companies keeping these lines. And then we also had the radio side up to Alert and over to the UK. Then we had all our domestic communications from here to the other bunkers: Debert, Valcartier, Borden, Shiloh, Penhold, and what was the other one? Nanaimo. Yeah.
And since, you said your parents had been sending you articles about this, but were you allowed to tell them anything about your work here?
Well, at the time, I was out west, and with my parents being in Ottawa, they would send us out a newspaper once a week or once a month, and there was articles in there about a facility, D&D facility being built out here. And, it was what they understood the facility to be and who it was in support of and whatnot, under the Continuity of Government program. And that's all I had, or information I had prior to, from that side of the fence, other than ex-military guys or military guys coming out of here doing our first tour, because I think this opened up around 64. So after they did their tours, some of them would come out and serve with our units out west, and of course we'd hear stories, but only the how it was run from our trade point of view, the type of shifts they had, some of the exercises they had, no detail to any great extent, but just a feel for how it ran here, and the support that the difference in our trades, because we classified this as a static posting versus a field posting being with the unit where you're deploying. Like the guys in Afghanistan now, they would come from a field unit with a bit of support from filling the odd little hole individually wise from static units like this here. Yeah.
And how did you find the other people in the bunker to be in your relations with them? Did you get to know a lot of people around, or was it just a place to come, do your work, and leave? Oh
no, there was good socializing here. Once you got going, the first tour, not as much socialized in the second tour. The first tour was my first trip out of the field, so this was a big change in my particular trade, learning the static side versus the field. And at that time, I bought property out in Franktown on the other side of Carleton Place, and I was building a house. So the first couple of years here was into work and out. And my second trip back in here I left here in after the Olympics. 76, 77, I was still 76. I came back here in 80. 79 or 80, I'm not too sure. I'd left my family in Franktown, did a trip to the Middle East and then back to Petawawa, and then my wife ended up with cancer, and I was compassionate, posting back to the Ottawa area, and I came in here as the station warrant officer on the disciplinary side. And then after Adeline got through that bout, then I went back into my trade side of the house, back into the facility control center, till 84. And then 84, I went down below here to the satellite ground terminal. The white bubble, I don't know if it's still down there. You know, when you go out the other end, the other far end of the tunnel, and you're looking down into the valley, there was a big white bubble with a satellite communications for NATO. Anyway, I ended up going down there till April 86, which time I retired from uniform, and then I went with Emergency Preparedness Canada into this new position, Emergency Government Facilities Technical Officer, that managed all these places across Canada. And there's these bunkers, this one here being at the federal level, the rest of them are at the provincial level, housing the provincial government under times of national threat. And then in the provinces, you had zones which were fed all their information and their staff back into the regional government headquarters. Well, like for example, we'll use Borden. So Borden was the provincial emergency headquarters. Then you had 10 zones in Ontario. And there was communications from those zones back into the provincial one. Then they had factitious levels below that for government level. You know, like Smith Falls would have a little council dealing with their emergencies there. They would feed into the zone level. The zone level would feed into Borden. Borden was feeding into here, and then all your heads of government were here. And then this facility couldn't house them all, so they had central CRU, central relocation units throughout the valley here, from Pembroke to Cornwall. So, for example, when DND or Transport Canada or Solicitor General came in here, they wouldn't put all of their heads in here in the event that this got hit. So they had some of their department in Solicitor General, I believe, RCMP, all these guys, they were up in Pembroke underneath the post office. And so we had to maintain those communications. So there. Transport Canada, I believe, was in Kempville. And so on and so on. Underneath post offices, they had small emergency facilities with rations and a generator and whatnot to maintain and operate anywhere from 48 to 72 hours under a serious national threat.
And what were the national threats that you were most concerned about, and did those change at all through your time?
No. I only did, well, this place here only locked up under one serious national threat, and that was Cuba in 60. That's the only time that they were locked up here, to my knowledge. We did a lot of exercises here with different scenarios, but the scenarios changed as the political scene changed around the world. For example, in the military, we always talked about red uniforms being Russian on the other side of the Iron Curtain. Well, when the Iron Curtain came down, you couldn't be further that. It was not politically correct. So what was the other type of threats we could have? You know, there's this here was always under a large nuclear threat, and the threat was never really with us. It was always with the States, with them having all of their missile silos all on the northern states, you know, from the west coast all the way into just slightly below Western Ontario. And there was 2,200 silos. So when the threat the scenario was is the threat would become it would come from Russia over Canada and into the States. Ours would go from the States over Canada into Russia. And the theory was is that the plan of attack was is that for every target that they had, meaning the Americans over there, and vice versa, Russians in the States, they'd be sending about 1 or 2 or possibly 3 of these missiles for the one target. Not all of them are totally accurate in the event. So you're going to have drop shorts, as they used to call them, or they all hit their target, but they're all nuclear. And then when you look at the weather that Environment Canada then used to provide for us from ground zero up to 105,000 feet, and the prevailing winds, and 85 to 90% of Canada's population being 49th parallel, you know, whether we liked it or not, we're involved. And that was the theory under the continuity of government program in these bunkers when the threat came at a point in time, bring the heads of government here. And then after the attack and after the air clears, these heads of government would go back out and try and put this country back on its feet. It was really a hard program to sell for me to go home if you were my daughter. And under a threat, I would come in here and you're still at home. Mm-hmm. You know, it was hard to sell with the complement of people we had here. It was hard to sell with, some took it seriously. Of course, I took it a heck of a lot more serious after my military career because I was part and parcel of a team that was trying to sell this. Yeah. And then, and that's one of the reasons why 4 of the provinces in Canada didn't have facilities like Borden and Valcartier and whatnot, because when the Memorandum of Understanding was being established back in the early 60s on a share basis program to build these facilities, Saskatchewan, PEI, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland would not agree to the wording of the Memorandum of Understanding because from what I was told and understood was because of the way it was written in the event of war, and they wouldn't agree, and they're the one, and consequently they didn't end up with a facility. Now later on, in the to be about 1988, 89, maybe around 90, New Brunswick decided, or New Brunswick agreed to a new Memorandum of Understanding, and there was a facility going in there. We were just days away from turning the soil when the press got onto it again. And consequently, it was turned off. We went down, we had site surveys were done, we knew what equipment was going in, the budgeting was done from the D&D side, their responsibility going in there, other departments, the cost sharing, all identified. And the new approach to it was the facility was going to be built where it would almost be a mirror image. There'd be so much showing above ground, and a mirror image, again, with it underground, offering it certain protection from, and you had to watch this nuclear stuff, you know, it could be protection from other things, you know, but the thing was, is the facility was going to be used 365 days by emergency services, teaching emergency services within the province. Like back in the old days, all the provinces had emergency services. They were called EMOs, Emergency Measures Organization, which used to be EPC years ago. And other provinces, later on, other provinces started to, pick up their own identity and whatnot. For example, I think BC became PEP, Provincial Emergency Planners. EMO stayed in Ontario, stayed in Nova Scotia, and other provinces and whatnot. But the new structure that we're looking at in New Brunswick, all of the training that went on in EMO, training and providing information and instruction to municipalities, towns, cities on emergency plans and all that. All of the facilities and the training and the staff required to do that was going to be in these facilities. But the bottom line is in the event of a national threat, the provincial government would come in and take over the facility. They would have to slide back to a couple of offices to maintain their posturing. It's the same thing here. D&D had a squadron of communicators in here, 230 guys. And under a typical day-to-day, they would posture and they spread out. So a supervisor would end up with one of the offices. It might be a Transport Canada office, and all of a sudden the typewriter would come in, and this would come in, and that would come in. And when EPC planned an exercise and was bringing those departments out, again, like for example, Transport Canada, then we had to give D&D a little bit of an eviction notice saying, they're coming in, we're coming in on such a date, and they would have to slide back to their assigned D&D floor space. And that was difficult across Canada. And that's where they came up with this position that I went into. I was the first one to go into it. And it was to travel the provinces, make sure these facilities were being maintained to a degree, but make sure that they understood that when the province or the feds are coming in, they have to go back. And then where they required, because of the new lines of telecommunications, where they required more floor space, then there was some negotiation that took place. Here, we went from the Strad, what they call Strad in those days, from 64 up to about 80, 79, 80. Then OSACs was coming in. OSACs required more floor space and whatnot. So there was a negotiation on. They would go up to the third floor. And when OSACs was established, then the old Strad area was going to be restructured so that we could get more offices in and whatnot. And then there was an offset on floor space. But it was all this dickering going on, and that had to be done under the continuity of government's officer, who then was Bill Lobin, and then I worked for him on the continuity of government technical side. It was a lot of fun and nerve-wracking sometimes, but it was establishing these memorandums of understanding.
You said that it was a tough sell to people. Were you talking about employees, to try and get employees to come in?
Well,
was there a lot of anxiety about
no.
the tax?
Not initially. The thing is you got to look at you get your young kids coming in here, 19, 20, 21. They've got a good trade, a good grasp of what was required of them. And but then when you get into an exercise scenario and you're painting a picture on it's a hypothetical thing, but this is what this facility is for, and this is what we have to practice for. And we do a 48 or 72-hour lockup. And, you'd get into all of you'd do a perimeter defense outside. Under the scenario then is if it went any further than 48 hours, we wouldn't be able to do the perimeter defense plus the communications. It just, it was just physically too demanding. And if it got beyond that, then mobile command on the military side was supposed to bring in a force of about 100 or 120 or possibly more, and take over and do the perimeter defense and let us get back to doing our business in here. When you got the kids involved in this, the staff involved in this, they started to realize the seriousness of a possible threat that way. And, you know, in '64, the nuclear bombs that they had then compared to the nuclear bombs that we now had in the 80s, it's going to take out this facility. You know, like this was designed not for a direct hit, but a miss, you know, because this wasn't the target. Ottawa would have been the target. It's a scary scenario to ask somebody to come in here, go through a possible nuclear threat, and your families are still out there. So the mentality started to change. Like we had almost 170 acres here. When I was a station warrant officer, we had a design submitted to Ottawa to put marriage quarters in here for our staff. So not in here, but down below. I think it was around 100 marriage quarters, houses. And it was suggested that the design of the house, with a garage, and under the garage, a fallout shelter, where when the husbands came in here to do their thing, and when the big bell or the big whistle went off, because they could go to a shelter and they would have rotation of, you know, canned goods and water and be able to survive that 24 or 72 hours, as well as their husbands in here doing their job. Or their spouse. I could have watched that today.
Was it a concern for you personally? Did you ever feel?
You sometimes, you know, over time, you sometimes think. You sometimes think about it. And you also, you know, I've sat with the commanding officer. And of course, when we come in here on these scenarios, you know, we brought our padres in, you know, and we would have a full complement of doctors and nurses and whatnot to support the little hospital, you know, dentists and whatnot. We also had psychologists come in, and we'd sit and talk with them. What if, because the build-up to come in here is going to be out there in the newspapers months in advance. Like, you know, we talk now of the world situation and the threats and whatnot. So if we were involved in this big scenario, you've got to work up to it. You know, it'd be months and months in advance, and then you're getting closer, and you know, so the families know, and it's a build-up, or it could be a build-up. We discussed this with the shrinks. And I discussed with the commanding officer that I was with that there's a strong likelihood that a fairly large percentage just wouldn't come. They say, well, I'm going to stay home and I'm going to stay with my family. And we exercised that scenario so that when we got called in, we would take a percentage out of play. I would tell you as a supervisor, 3 of your people are not here, and we could use all kinds of excuses, but we would make you operate without your 3. And it puts pressure on the rest in that particular area that you're working in, because you're into a 24/7 scenario. But it was a realistic figure. And we even exercised. I remember one exercise, we had a kid that could really play the role. And he was in here doing his thing. And then it was his turn to go out and do perimeter security. And we briefed him. We said, when you get out there, just after the supervisor puts you in position or whatnot, then you just walk out the gate and carry on. And we had the enemy force was the Governor General Foot Guards out of Ottawa. They were housed at the fire hall in town, and they knew that we were going to exercise this. So they're monitoring how this took place. And he got picked up, and he was asked what he was doing, and he says, I've had enough of this. I'm going to my family. And they thought there was something wrong with him. And he was put in National Defense Medical Center in Ottawa. And he played the role right to the T until the end of the exercise. And then we revealed the scenario and they released him. But it could happen. You know, it could have happened in that day.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Were there any other sort of psychological concerns with people in the bunker?
Yeah, a lot of people coming in those doors. Two scenarios. First arriving, posted in, you don't know. A cook, I can recall a cook that came in here. And, you know, you come in and they spoke to you on the intercom. The security would say, you know, yeah, come in, and they'd open up the door, you'd get in. The inner door is closed, then the door would close in behind you. And there's a pause because it's an airlock. So once the pressure is right, then they can open up the inner door. And a lot of people were phobic. Not a lot, there was some. In this particular case, it used to bother him. And he made it clear to his supervisor. And we had incidences like that before, people identifying that, and over time they got used to it. But this guy, all the way through his 2-year tour, he just raised Cain over it. But, you know, I don't know whether he in fact had that problem. I think he was just one of those pains in the butt to start with. But yeah, there was cases like that. And then when you get locked up in here for those that wouldn't have the chance to go out and do perimeter security, you know, you get in here for 72 hours. Eat, sleep, work, you know. It can get to you. Yeah.
Was there anyone who was living on site while you were doing your tours here?
We had problems. When I was in the SWO's position, our single people were living in Rockcliffe in substandard quarters. And they're Category B quarters. They were substandard. The amount of money that they were paying for them was not much, but in comparison to other stations and bases across Canada, we got the military-wise, we got the okay from Emergency Preparedness to let our people stay in and live on site, and that was, I don't know, back in the late 70s. And then they were pulled out of here and they were moved to Uplands. And then we provided a bus service for the shifts back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you remember any sorts of social events or functions or that kind of thing that would happen at the bunker or with bunker people?
Yeah, but all the events were outside, other than the military, you know, mess dinners and stuff in here. But everything was outside at the mess, like basically a social center, all ranks. One of two in Canada. This one and Leitrim were the only two all ranks messes in Canada. Not normally allowed, but because of the facility and the uniqueness and whatnot, the building outside that became a mess was there during the phases of building this year. That's where all the draftsmen and engineers and whatnot there. Then. I believe the line crew, in support of all your line work outside, your cabling and whatnot, I believe they used part of the facility for a while, then had a building constructed for them. Well, the new line building was constructed back in the 80s, but one of the other site buildings the linemen moved into, and then that became a social center, and that's where all the socializing was done. There used to be socializing in here, like messes, all different ranks. You know, the junior, senior NCOs and officers. From the time it was built up to about, I don't know, be to the early 70s. And then they were shut down and everything was moved outside.
Okay. And did it work well, this all ranks mess?
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Always a couple of glitches, but no, it worked good. It was good. The operating the mess under mess constitutions that we had, when guidelines and other facilities allowing a percentage of your strength being associate members. We brought civilians in. They contributed immensely to the day-to-day operations. We had happy hours like everybody else did in the old days. We had a beautiful winter carnival here for 3 days in February with a draft system. You'd pick a captain for the 4 teams, and then you'd go into a draft system. People would indicate who was available for the shift workers when they were available, and then they'd start picking teams. You had your blue team, your red team, and whatnot. And there was all kinds of activities with a big wind-up Saturday night party. It was a lot of fun, and it was good for morale. And it got the younger ones mingling more, which is nice to see. It got some of the old diehards coming in, but it also got the civilians participating. One of the teams was always the associate members, and it was a lot of fun. I don't know if you got some of I don't know who got the station photo album that was here. I don't know whether it's here or whether it's at the museum in Kingston.
I'm not sure if we have that. Would that have photos of the winter carnival?
Yeah, tons of them.
Yeah. Helen Rosso brought in
I know Helen,
a bunch of photos from it.
I haven't seen Helen in I don't know how long.
Yeah, she brought in a bunch of, but they were her own.
Is she still in the service?
No, she's working for a satellite communications company. She said, I don't know which one.
Yeah.
She got out.
She worked just around the corner from here. As a matter of fact, this used to be part of the technical area here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I haven't seen Helen in a long time.
Okay. You sort of touched on it here and there, but what effect would you say that the Cold War had on your day-to-day life and your work in the bunker, I suppose?
Not so much the time that I was here in uniform, other than in here, we had to think that way. Although the staff here on a day-to-day basis would come in and just do their job. When you got from the commanding officer down to a few others, a handful of about 4 or 5, they were always dealing with emerge preparedness, because this was their facility, and the squadron was squatting, and there was always messages and memos going back and forth, and then planning the next exercises. What type of this scenario? Realistic scenario. Other than that, no, because it was starting to phase out in the 80s. I mean, we've sat back. I've been out since '86, and we've sat back and we've talked about when the Iron Curtain came down, how we dropped our guard, meaning the government dropped their guard. It's over, and it's a known fact that it wasn't over. It's worse. I mean, the threats out there are still there. Personally, I think the government made a big mistake in giving up these facilities. I mean, they could have. There's building going on in Canada that still doesn't meet the codes of the structure of this building. Have you ever seen the video on this building of this place?
They're trying to get copies made of the nuclear roof. So the DVD
Nuclear roof?
that you're talking about?
Yeah. Well, it was classified for so long.
Yeah.
Then, because of briefings and all that, we had another version made up that allowed us to show it. And then, of course, when they said the continuity of government program was over and all that, then this stuff became declassified and we started showing it. I think I got a copy.
I think that the DVD versions just came through in the bunker, but it was taking a while.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure Dave Peters would be on top of all that. Oh yeah, yeah. He was full of energy and very support. Yeah, he was the big force behind the continuity. They picked the right guy when they brought him in as the director.
You covered a lot of this inadvertently. Oh yeah, you said that the Cold War was starting to die out by the 80s, but were there sort of significant moments in the news or the international scene that you remember that, like, there's still reason to be concerned? This is a Cold War event.
Not that I can recall. No, we created our own scenarios to keep us on our toes for here, both EPC and D&D, and throughout the other facilities in supporting the role. But then, as time went on across Canada, it was phasing out, and you had to rethink these. If you're going to support these places, we had to look at other, this is where we, like a department downtown in Ottawa in the 90s. We're facing pressure that if there's a threat on their building, bomb threat, for example, D&D, big department, Transport Canada, where are you going to go if you get off the bus tomorrow morning and there's a bomb threat? You can't get into your building for 4 days. We just can't close down Transport Canada. So they had to find a place to move to and to be able to provide minimum service. Okay, and we said, well, what better place than here, because you're already set up here to provide minimum service under a national threat. And this is what we're selling. Have all of your backup, all your disks, all your archiving, have it here. And so that if you had to come out here, you might be 1, 2, or 3 days behind the 8 ball on your backups, because those days we had AES word processing and stuff. We weren't up to speed like we are today, where you could walk in here with an 8 gig stick and bring your whole department with you, Again, hard to sell. Hard to sell because you got personalities, you got old diehards. Some departments didn't like this facility. Anybody that was thinking straight loved the facility, but we're getting involved in the change of time. We don't need this facility, and they eventually, you've probably heard, the Bank of Canada vault down here. The Bank of Canada said from day one they'd never move all their gold bullion here under a national threat. The RCMP ended up using the facility here for their archiving. We had a lot of our stuff here. And then again, when the Iron Curtain came down, we didn't have this facility to come to. Where were we going to go? So we ended up using our college up in Arnprior. I had to set up a setup there where, in the event that EPC was hit with a threat downtown, and we couldn't go to work for 3 or 4 days. We moved up to Arnprior and we set up a facility, something similar to what you had down here, what we established down here on the 3rd floor. But we had to have a fallback, especially being who we were. We had to operate 24/7 and we had to stay on top of things. You know, like right now with EPC, all those forest fires that are out west. When a forest fire starts, it starts here. When it goes from one municipality to the other, the province automatically takes over. It's the way things go. And then if it steps into another province, the feds take over. When the feds take over, we're involved. But we don't know if that's ever going to happen. So when we track forest fires, then we track them right from the beginning to have a history of it, where it's going, who's involved, what the support is on it. And then by the time it crosses the border and we get involved, then we have to go to the minister and ask for the money. And is D&D going to be called in? Well, if D&D was called in, they're called in through EPC, because there's an audit trail behind that. For every person in uniform that goes there, you're wear and tear in their boots, their vehicles, so on, so on, so on. It's very costly, but you have to. And so if we're doing that, or if we were doing that, then all of a sudden we couldn't get into our building. I mean, even through strikes, they picket the building. We did that a couple of times. We had to move out there. But it has to be a seamless move. And, we knew that. But how do you push it? And then what's the mindset on the other side of the table? And then there's a cost associated with that. Yeah. So it was a hard program to sell. Very hard.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Give you another scenario.
Okay.
BC. Earthquake. They're going to get hit, and they're going to get hit hard. Now, for those of us that were involved in that knew, and then when you start tracking other earthquakes around the world, different types of earthquakes, the magnitude of it, and then when you look at the scenario in Vancouver and the island, an earthquake by day or an earthquake by night in the magnitude of 8 on the Richter scale, you're looking at 2 to 3 to 350,000 people in seconds gone. Richmond, BC, where the airport is on silk sand. Soon as that shakes like that, and like this from that type of an earthquake, then the airport just disappears. It just sinks. So how do you stress that with a government in place and to get money to start any future buildings, make sure that they meet something that can handle 6 or 8 or 7 or 10 on the Richter scale in their structure, public works. They just took the attitude, it's just too costly, and if they brought it up to the public is going to put some demands on the government that the government didn't want to face. So the attitude was, we'll start teaching our kids in kindergarten about earthquakes, what to do under the table, neutral corners and all this here. And as they get involved in this world and whatnot, we'll let that generation take over. Good government. But it was our job to try and sell that. Our plan at that time, we built a facility in Victoria that could handle 10 on the Richter scale. We postured ourselves in there, minimum office, whatnot, a little bit of storage. We brought provincial emergency planners in, had them sit, get their stuff. Then we started bringing emergency services in, 911, all your dispatching for your ambulances, police and whatnot, put them in. So when a threat came, their major communications were going to survive and they would survive. Now, I don't know how that program is going today, but that was what we were trying to do in New Brunswick when it was stopped.
When did you finish your work with BBC, I guess?
1st of April, 98. Noon hour. Then I ended up here at Loch March on the golf course, running the show there.
actually.
No.
And we've sort of touched on most of the topics and questions that
Yeah.
I had to talk about, but do you have any sort of things that you wanted to talk about or stories that you remember?
No, I don't know what gaps you guys are trying to fill. No, I don't know if you have any specifics. Is there anything on the communication side here? Or are you just looking at in general?
Well, generally we're looking at more of the social and human experience of the bunkers. There's a decent amount of information and research been done on the more technical side of things.
Yeah.
In here.
No, I experienced stuff in here, military, that was unique because of the building. That I don't know whether you guys would be interested in it. I know it wouldn't come out in public forums and all that, but we ran into some problems here. Yeah, I was here during the Lortzy incident.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I just finished up. I finished up here in 84, 1st of May, down to the satellite ground terminal. And on the 8th of May, every year I go to Petawawa for a memorial service. And on the 8th of May, 68, we had 7 guys drown on an exercise, a jump exercise. And they were all very dear friends. And so I go up the Riviera. That year, 1st of May, I got transferred down below, and I'd made arrangements with the commanding officer down there to use the staff car and pick up a couple of guys from here. And we went up to Petawawa. We did the service. We went into the mess for a late lunch, and we were being bucked like we had dinner the real. Oh, some communications type went berserk from CARP and shut up the legislative building in Quebec City. We thought they were just joking, because there's a lot of rivalry in the military. And not seeing some of these guys for a year, So we didn't pay too much attention to it, but when we got back in the car after lunch and heading down, turned the radio on. Wow. So we got back here 3 o'clock in the afternoon, tried to come in the entrance, and there was military, police, and of course the press was all over the place, and they recognized us. They let us in, and I knew who it was shortly after I got here. I asked one of the commissioners, and he knew me well, and I was shocked. I knew Denny Lortzy well. Supply tech, and I coached broomball here, and he was one of the young lads of the broomball. Very surprised. Really surprised. And then we had the military inquiry. Plus I was summoned here under the Quebec police, for the inquiry. And changes made here on a 2-man system with keys and whatnot. Shouldn't have happened. It did. It shouldn't have happened with respect to getting stuff out of here. I was surprised.